Welcome. I am Lisa Gurwitch, and I'm President and CEO of Delivering Good. I am so pleased to come to you from our office in the New York City Garment District for this exciting conversation with 4 philanthropic leaders. In just a minute, I will introduce them, and they will have a chance to share with us their wisdom and experience in making the world a better place through philanthropy. This is our second in a series of Women of Inspiration roundtables, and the response to last Wednesday's session, Champions of Women's Leadership, has been outstanding. We will make sure you receive a link to the recording. Today, we will tackle society's challenges. We at Delivering Good are proud of our 36 years of impact on poverty, made possible through the generosity of companies that provide product donations and support, foundations and individual donors, and our partnerships with local community nonprofits in every state, Canada and beyond. During 2020, a year of unprecedented hardship for everyone, we provided almost 70 million essential items to people in need. While I'm certainly proud, what keeps me up at night is not the glory of these accomplishments. Instead, I think about the young person experiencing homelessness, the foster child, the woman seeking employment after incarceration who were turned away last year because we did not provide enough. Our mission is focused on using these donations to help build hope, dignity, and self-esteem. Our vision is of a more equitable world in which all have the essential items they need to overcome adversity and fulfill their potential. We have much to do. Any questions you have for our panelists today can be entered into the chat area, and you'll also find full bios on each guest there as well. Our panelists today are Janiece Evans-Page, CEO of Tides, based in the San Francisco Bay Area with a global impact, Lily Kanter, the founder and CEO of Boon Supply Co., and founder and board member of Serena and Lily, a lifestyle brand based in California, Dr. Michele Moal-Gray, attorney, executive, and chairperson and trustee of the Countess Moira Charitable Foundation, and Jacqueline Novogratz, the founder and CEO of Acumen, which invests patient capital philanthropically to solve the toughest issues of poverty. In her book, Women, Philanthropy, and Social Change, the editor, Elaine Clift, wrote about 15 years ago, "Not so long ago, the phrase women in philanthropy seemed an oxymoron to me. How could those two words be joined?" Well, we know that we have come a very long way, and our panelists are going to share their journeys and their impact. So without further ado, I will pose the first question. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to ask each of you to describe your role in the world of philanthropy. Personal philanthropy, corporate giving, advising, and managing other people's giving. So why don't we start with Janiece?
Thank you, and I'm so honored to be here, Lisa. In terms of describing my role, I think there's my personal engagement, but also my currently professional, and I'd like to say they actually are blended together. So in terms of the work we do at Tides, we actually play in the middle. We work with donors, so we work with individuals, we work with families, we work with foundations and corporations in terms of their social impact strategies and their giving strategies as well. But we also work with those on the ground, the social change leaders. So we play this really interesting role of working with those who want to donate, but also those who are really driving change on the ground in terms of connecting the dots such that they have the resources to do what they want to do. We also play in the space of impact investments, which is another growing space as we get into the conversation about social impact and kind of broadening kind of the world of philanthropy as we currently know it. In terms of my personal engagement, I think I also play across all of those, which is what brought me here to Tides.
Thank you. And I think we'll find that the personal and professional are very melded together for all of our panelists today. Lily, how about you?
Oh, yeah, thank you for having me today. I'd say across 3 areas, my family has a small family foundation, which we engage our entire family in the giving. And as far as my professional life, I'm building a new company right now that truly is what I would call reimagining capitalism, which is building a hybrid of for-profit with nonprofit giving. And so that is boonmarket.com. And so I'm really excited about how powerful that engine of capitalism can provide need. And as far as community, I engage in a lot of volunteerism in the local community in any capacity that I can.
We've got a very high energy panel today. Michele, how about you? The various roles that you play.
Thank you, Lisa. I just also wanted to say thank you to Delivering Good for the important and really significant work that you are providing and for the benefits to millions of families. We're just totally grateful for all of the work that you're doing. I'm very honored to have been asked to participate here. I think across the board, my interests are personal philanthropy has been an interest forever, but my current role as chairperson of a family foundation is very important to us for a variety of reasons. One, this family foundation was created with my husband, and we were trying to determine where we could create the biggest impact in positive ways. We chose affecting the lives of children as much as possible, and the reason we did that was because we thought we could provide support across a number of agencies and interests, so that we would be able to keep our family members interested and involved in their ways of giving. So we fund a variety of agencies, grantees in health, education, arts, cultural foundations, sports, science, civil rights. And I think that my particular personal interests span those as well. I'm engaged both in civic organizations and in nonprofit organizations in the community where I live, and through the foundation, really most interested in the way we can provide advice and guidance to potential recipients for how they can frame their requests, how they can grow as organizations, and how they can provide the best support for their programs and services.
Thank you. Many thoughtful approaches. Jacqueline, would you share with us, please?
Sure. And thanks so much, Lisa, and Delivering Good. It was exciting to hear about just how much you've done this past year. And there's, in a way, my work, which is also integrated, and I think it is part of what it means to be a woman, integrates not only my personal and professional, but the work that all of my fellow panelists do, in that Acumen exists to solve some of the toughest issues of poverty, like healthcare, education, agriculture, energy. We essentially have a community of philanthropists who give philanthropy that we then turn around and invest as long-term equity or debt in entrepreneurs who are focused on solving those problems, essentially where markets don't exist, where there's a lot of corruption, complacency, bureaucracy, and then we accompany those entrepreneurs so that they can build solutions that allow low-income people at the end of the day to solve their own problems. So I would say it's looking at the right kind of capital, and that includes philanthropy in its different forms, focused on the right kind of character, but surrounded in community. And I hope that we get to talk a little bit more about community, because it is so important in the world of philanthropy.
Thank you. And we will definitely come back to community. But several of you mentioned impact. And I know in a previous interview that I had the opportunity to see from Janiece, she talked about wanting to make the biggest impact. So how do you define impact in your philanthropic endeavors? And why don't we go kind of in reverse, and Janiece will let you end, but we'll start with Jacqueline.
So Acumen's invested in about 135 companies. And the way we think about impact is in in broadly three ways: the lives that we impact, the minds that we impact, and the systems that we impact or change. And so probably the best example of that would be a solar light company that started when 1.5 billion people had no access to electricity. While that company long-term has impacted 100 million low-income people's lives, we've watched the narrative change around what off-grid solar can do for poor people in parts of the world that have just had darkness for most of their populations. And now we're looking at how you translate that into actually creating systems. And so we can go into how to measure impact, but I would say it's in those three areas across axes then of deep impact and broad impact. Deep being the way lives are changed, and broad being the number of lives that are changed.
Terrific. Minds, lives, and systems. And Michele, how about you? How do you feel that you are defining impact in the work of the foundation?
I think it's an interesting question, because there was just a study released within the past week about the difference in generations regarding how they measure impact in nonprofits' performance, and whether they consider it strength of impact or quality of programs. And since we are a multi-generational family foundation, we look at a variety of forms to consider whether or not the impact is against the quality of the programs that the organization is providing, whether it's an efficiency in their spending, whether it's something like simply reaching a defined goal within a period of time, what their long-term versus short-term results are. And so I think we would say we are always going to look at a combination of factors and not apply a single standard against all of the organizations which we support, but rather take a look at the organization itself and how it is fulfilling its mission and providing the actual services that it says it's going to.
So that's part of the answer, and we'll be sure to come back to Jacqueline in terms of measuring impact. Lily, what does that question bring to mind for you?
Well, it's a great question. I feel like I've been thinking about it nonstop for 20 years, that, just thinking about impact, to me, it's like impact happens, I really believe, one person at a time if you want to change the world. And so I tend to kind of obsess over what are the transformative things that really make an impact on individuals, and which ones are really truly scalable. I mean, a great school teacher, to me, has impact. And so certain things are scalable, certain things aren't. But, the beauty of technology now, I think, is really going to enable us to scale impact at a level we've never seen before. And certainly a lot of the innovations that we're seeing coming out, whether it's being able to deliver, medical supplies via drone. I mean, there's just some incredible technologies that are coming to bear. So I tend to focus on impact one person at a time. I look for social entrepreneurs that are truly transforming lives and really, think about the idea of how to scale what they're doing to impact more people.
And that's a question that we at Delivering Good think about often from the perspective of changing one life at a time by providing something that someone needs, but also changing whole industries and markets by creating a movement for the environmentally effective use of product donations. Janiece, we started out with me quoting you as saying that you wanted to make the biggest impact. So how are you making the biggest impact?
I think there's a couple of things, and as you know, this is a new chapter for me in terms of my my career. And previously roles I was in, I really was kind of an entrepreneur, as we now use that term. I was, a social entrepreneur driving change within companies, right? In terms of connecting the dots, in terms of enlightenment, or even more importantly, say venture philanthropy and how that's connecting to changing lives and communities. I am just incredibly grateful for this next chapter where I am now at Tides. And when we speak to impact at Tides, we are at this kind of pivotal moment right now in terms of, how do we quote unquote look at impact moving forward? So I think there's a couple of things, and we too, similar to Jacqueline, play really in that critical space of social justice, in all aspects of social justice, climate justice, racial justice, gender, et cetera. In terms of the impact for us right now, especially coming off of 2020 and thinking about the pandemic and racial reckoning and all the things I think we're still addressing and have been addressing forever, we are at this next phase of really looking at the breadth of resources to drive change and impact in a couple of areas. One of which is to kind of shift gears from kind of transactional outputs to real transformation. And I heard mention of transformation. And so if you think about even a Tides, as I mentioned, we play kind of at this nexus of social change with funders, but also those on the ground driving change, if you will, in nonprofits and even for-profit social ventures. But for us is to move from kind of transactional outputs to real transformation. And I say that because we had an unprecedented year in terms of revenue, but I've been unapologetic about how do we really now ensure that those investments are driving quote unquote system change. So it's going from transactions to transformation. The other one, as I just mentioned, really though, is thinking more about system change and what role do we Tides play in accelerating changes, if you will, in some of these systems that we know are broken. And then the third one for us really is, our partners are asking us to have a more distinctive point of view, because we do play in this very interesting space. So how do we even use that point of view to be an agent of change as well? And how do you measure impact as a result of that? So it's really, again, three ways that we're looking at impact. One, as I mentioned, really is just moving from transactions to quote unquote transformation. And again, measuring that is a whole different thing. As Jacqueline said too, is just looking at how are we going to quote unquote change some of these broken systems. And then the third one is really how do you use our point of view, or even having a distinctive point of view as it relates to social justice, to also drive change.
So Jacqueline, I think we have to go back to you when we think about transformational change, being an agent for change. So how at Acumen are you measuring impact?
So one of our values, and you can hear it in all of the women here, is serving what we call voices unheard, the people who are too often overlooked and underestimated. And so because we so believe in listening, we actually take advantage of the new technologies that Lily's talking about, smartphones. And we will text 5,000 to 10,000 customers of one of our customers simultaneously. And remember, these are smallholder farmers. These are people living in urban slums, but they have a phone. And people haven't really asked them before how they feel about whatever device or good has been delivered to them. And we'll deduce from the questions that they answer whether their income has changed. In the case of solar light, how many more hours of light do they have at night? How do they use those hours? And so it busts through many of our assumptions. We assume that more light would mean more kids studying. It doesn't. But it does mean the dignity of being able to read your Bible or their Quran, seeing people, feeling safe. Women tend to put their lights outside the house, not inside the house. So we end up with extraordinary levels of information that then gets translated into knowledge, so that we can then compare all of the different organizations and companies that are working in that same sector, and measure their impact accordingly, whether you're looking at environmental impact, social impact, the poverty factors. And it's really been a game changer from us. But it is a bottom-up approach to measuring impact from the perspective of the people who are being served.
That reminds me of a point that you made in your terrific new book, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution, Practices to Build a Better World. And it's about humility and questioning one's own assumptions. And you just gave an example of when women will do something or when you get feedback that's different than what you expected. So I'd like to ask you and everyone else about that question of humility in your giving and in your philanthropy. So since we started with the book, Jacqueline, why don't you answer and then we'll go around.
I actually think humility is something that women really bring to this space of philanthropy. That humility is about listening before we speak. Humility is about service, caring about what works and being honest about what doesn't. But I think it's very important when we think about humility that it isn't meekness. It isn't simply doubt. That when humility is most powerful is when it is paired with audacity. And it's really about holding the two in tension. And that's what we would call the moral imagination. The real change makers, and I dare say the best philanthropists, have the humility to see and recognize the world as it is. Janiece talked about social justice, issues of racism that we have to deal with as a world. So clear-eyed look at what we're dealing with, and yet has that audacity to imagine that we could actually change it, and then does the work accordingly. But step by step, the ability to fail, the ability to, and the courage to get up and try again, I believe comes from a place that you're not the most important person in the world, that you are here to serve others, and that at its essence is what humility is.
Humility and audacity, and the audacity to fail. One of the opportunities that private foundations sometimes have is to take risks with the idea that there might be failure, but to approach that with humility. So Michele, how has that affected humility and risks in what you're doing with the foundation?
I think it's interesting. I like that humility and audacity concept. I think that's wonderful. One of the things that I think has been significantly affected by our interest in listening to what the organizations want and not assuming that we know what is the best way to fund programs, or what are the best programs to fund. That if you are humble enough to understand that you are able to provide a resource, but it isn't really you who are going to be doing the work, that what you are doing is assisting others in ways that allow them to be strong providers of support. You have to be able to take a risk saying, we don't know what the best is for your organization necessarily. We don't know where your resources are going to be best applied, but we're willing to take a risk that you can identify those areas for us. A particular organization that we did fund was a startup in the world of landmine clearing, and we got involved with this because one of our trustees happened to know an individual who was particularly involved in trying to save children from crossing landmine fields in the Middle East. We took this as something we knew nothing about, but the individuals who were there knew a lot about. And I'm happy to say that that organization, because of some seed money that we were able to give, has grown into a major international organization where we are not a sole provider of the resources. I think that I think it's basically being able to say, we need to know from you what are the resources that you need, and we're willing to be educated and to provide whatever assistance we can based on our learning curve. Do that humbly and with some, I think, just some individual reticence.
But a tremendous impact in saving the lives of many, many people. Lily, humility, audacity, and risk. As a business person, you deal in all those worlds.
Absolutely. I actually think it's an echo of the same theme. I think very successful corporate leaders who enter the world of philanthropy can easily be arrogant because they've been successful. And it's about checking your arrogance at the door. I think that so many case studies of enormous sums of money have been put into play that have not been successful because they didn't shut up and listen. And I think that on the flip side, when handed over to the community to empower the community to solve their problems and to talk and to listen, there are countless examples of success on that side. So I think that is the overarching theme of what we're all saying here. So I echo.
And Janiece, both as an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur and as the CEO of Tides, how do these concepts of humility and audacity and risk feel for you right now?
I think we start each day at Tides thinking about in service of, right? In service of community, in service of those who are unfortunately coming from underserved circumstances, underserved communities. So it really is about being in service of and also for the love of. One of the other things I hope that we begin each day with when we think about our partners, when we think about those really who are in need of our support, is I think about love, right? And so it's really, as we've discussed here, is in service of, and it's also for the love of.
That really resonates for me as I think about our 800 plus community partners around the country who are dealing with so many different kinds of challenges for their local communities, and really listening and learning and being focused on love. So thank you for that. We've touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to explore in more detail, especially since there's been so much publicity lately on certain very prominent women's philanthropy. What differences do you see in women's giving and how this has changed over time? So Michele, why don't we start with you?
Fine. I think it's something where women have now been able to create and are in control of their own resources in ways that were not necessarily available many years ago. If you think about the original role of women in foundation work or organizational work, they served on advisory councils to boards. They served on women's councils. Women were not having a seat at the table, and yet they were the primary fundraisers in many respects for a lot of organizations and foundations. I think at this time, women are well, first, let me just say, women are not monolithic, so everybody is coming from a different place in terms of their personal interest, in terms of their resources, in terms of their potential financial support. But women are more apt to volunteer their time. Women are more apt to provide a different voice in terms of the personal interaction with organizations and with the groups and communities that they are intending to serve. So I think it's very, very evident that as women have attained significantly more leadership roles in professional organizations, in their own work environments, and have accumulated the personal resources to make their own financial decisions about giving, that this is where we're seeing a significant difference, and where organizations and foundations need to be very, very cognizant that if you want to involve women in the philanthropic effort, you have to solicit them. You have to understand where the woman's issues are and where her personal giving is going to come from. I think it's a significant difference over the past 40 years.
Absolutely. Janiece, how about you? What are you seeing?
I'm seeing a lot in terms of what's happening. I think there's a lot of things happening. Some of it has to do with just kind of social movements that are happening right now where we women are not waiting to be asked. So that truly is, I think, one of the forces we're seeing. Two, I think, without me just saying, there is data to show just in terms of our ability to collaborate and the impact that that's making as well in terms of whether it's an individual or even coalescing resources together. Women, and it's not just because I say so, but women actually do collaborate better. And so you're seeing us pool our resources together to really drive change. Three, I think in terms of our voice, I think, as I mentioned about just some of the women movement or the women, this is another women movement I think we're experiencing, whether it's our first woman vice president and all the other forces going on, is we're definitely using our voice in a different way. So I think it's a time of all of these efforts coming together, but I also think we're not waiting to be asked anymore. I think we're impatient in many cases, and we're going to take the leadership helm at this point and drive the change that we've been asking for.
And in terms of your team, both in the Bay Area, in New York, are you seeing a difference in the women's involvement on the teams and the kinds of things that they're interested and want to move forward, their agendas?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we're a strong team of leaders, but we definitely have over 50% who are women. So let me say that. But we definitely are elevating our work in terms of gender lens investing. We're elevating our work in terms of programs supporting adolescent girls. So that's one of my passions is youth and adolescent youth in particular and girls. So there's no doubt that we truly are elevating a lot of the work that is focused distinctly on women and girls.
Super. Lily, how are you seeing changes? You're in the Bay Area, a community that has had strong women in philanthropy for a very long time. How are you seeing that?
Well, I mean, I think that girls, right, women being all the way down to young ladies their voices are being very empowered right now. I think I really saw a massive shift with the Me Too movement. And, to be honest with you, I'm a little worried about boys right now. But, as far as women in philanthropy, I think we lead with compassion and heart and humility, and that is a female, quality that I feel is so necessary in the area of philanthropy. And so, not, a lot of men possess those qualities as well, but I think that's a key ingredient when we're working in this field.
And Jacqueline, both in terms of women's giving, the women investing in Acumen, and also the issues relating to women that you're addressing around the world.
Well, if you're talking about poverty, you're talking about women. So there's not a single problem, that area in which we're focused, that aren't disproportionately impacting women. And what's been really exciting to me over the past 20 years of running Acumen is to see the growing proportion of women entrepreneurs, the way that they are really using what I would call moral imagination to fully get out of a binary. It has to be this way or that way, and create a new field of possibility. I'm about to interview right after this one of our young women entrepreneurs in the United States who is really looking to disrupt healthcare by using technology to deal with the opioid crisis. And when you listen to Stephanie speak, she doesn't just speak about ROI and P&Ls, even though she was a venture capitalist. But she talks about the need to reduce shame, the need to increase dignity. There is a great deal of empathy at the heart of what she does. In some ways, I think that women, and this may change, and I actually think it goes to Lily's point, but certainly women who grew up in my generation, we felt that we were the outsiders, that we somehow had to learn how to navigate a man's world. And we got really good at code switching. And that gave us a superpower, because not only do we understand how the mainstream works, but we understand what it feels like to be at the edges or even outside the edges. And this is a moment in terms of our interdependence where I actually think that those individuals who have experienced what it means to be an outsider, and that can include all of us, that there's something to tap into in the way that we build the new businesses, as we reimagine capitalism, in the way that we give our philanthropy, in the way that we start companies. And I'm really seeing those shifts as we see more women of all stripes get into the different fields of building businesses to solve poverty.
Absolutely. And I'd like to bring the voice of our audience in, because we just had a comment from our board member, Monica Bertrand, that said that she appreciated the comments about the concern for boys, because she feels like it's important to find the right balance in supporting both young boys and young girls. And I would say that that is true on the side of philanthropists and community engagement, and also on the side of helping those in need. So speaking of encouraging people to get started in this philanthropic journey, going back to Jacqueline's book for a moment, she encourages readers to just start. So how would you encourage our viewers to get started if they haven't already? And Jacqueline, we'll let you have the last word on this, and we'll let Lily have the first word.
Okay, I think that, get started means at any opportunity. Sorry, I have a little dog that's barking right now. Whatever that looks like in your world, whatever time slot that you have available to do that in, I think that's what Jacqueline's book is saying. It's just not waiting for that, major inflection to happen. Start to make small steps. Start to get involved with something that you're passionate in. And, but I really, I think that is different for everyone.
Super. Michele?
I would just say that people need to think about giving as an act of empathy, an act of grace. And when you are able to give something, that's the time to get involved. It doesn't matter whether you're donating your time, your money, your expertise. Everybody has some gift to offer, and those gifts are needed now more than ever. So I would say, do not believe that you have to be exceptionally wealthy. Do not believe that the time that you give has to be extensive. We have seen in a variety of areas over the past year that small donations of time, small donations of resources, small donations of expertise are making significant differences in the communities where we live. And if you truly listen to what the needs are in the communities around you, it is okay to go ahead and give something just to begin. Take the areas where you are particularly interested, and don't assume that you have to have a measurable result of what it is that you give. Don't assume that it has to be something where you're giving the value of a naming gift. Just go ahead and provide your love of humankind in whichever way you're able.
You know, Michele, as you describe gifts of all sizes and all types, I think about families who devote, instead of having gifts for their kids' birthdays, they will either have a drive for new toys or new items that benefits Delivering Good, or financial contributions. I think of the team members at our community partners, and some of these are quite grassroots organizations that send us gifts at the end of the year. And I just want them to know that we see every one of those gifts, and everyone really matters, especially the people who see the impact of what we're all doing together. That really resonates for me. Janiece, what about your message to everyone who's watching right now, how to get started?
I think one of the things I say is there's no such thing as a small act of goodness, right? When you think about the breadth of opportunities in terms of making an impact, purpose, all the things we're talking about, there is no such thing as a small act of goodness. So, I'm mindful that different people bring different resources to bear. They bring different values and even different beliefs, and so I always say kind of meeting someone where they are. So in terms of, say millennials, their beliefs in giving, et cetera, may be very different, but it really is finding out your own true north and what is it that gets you excited? What do you care about? What is your purpose? And starting there. And it could be donating, it could be volunteering. There's different ways or on-ramps in different companies to get involved or to lean in. So anyway, I think you have to first kind of find out what is it that you're passionate about and kind of what is your purpose, and start to lean in on that. And it might be donating a pair of shoes. I mean, who knows what that initial act might be. I do want to share my gratitude, with my sister Jacqueline on this panel. And I never envisioned myself being in a role of philanthropy. I never even defined it that way. But when I later, without giving too much away in terms of our ages, when I found out about social entrepreneurship, it was really through Jacqueline in one of my previous career roles at Hewlett Packard. And that was where the spark came from for me, is that there was this space out there where I could use my business skills to drive meaningful change, right? Working with folks, social entrepreneurs that didn't even know that term existed. So I think for all of us is really using just what is it that motivates you? What is it that's in front of you that gives you that opportunity to get started?
So Jacqueline, I think Janiece has teed it up for you.
I mean, and thank goodness Janiece joined, because she helped transform Acumen in so many different ways, and it's been just wonderful to partner. And I think that goes to that point also. What I'm hearing from everyone, and I don't want to repeat because everyone has done a much better job than I could do, but that it's really just start with whatever you have and wherever you are. Take a step, and that step will lead you to another step, even if you don't like what you find at that first step. And in a way, it starts to ready you. What I heard from you actually, and Lily, that there is something powerful too about teaching our children giving really early. And I grew up in a tradition where there was this expectation that you would give. And I think it is that mindset, that orientation. And what I heard from Janiece is, in finding purpose, if you do want to think about philanthropy and go bigger, the Jesuits have an extraordinary saying, which is to go where your deepest yearning meets the world's greatest need. And I think that's really powerful. We have so many problems around us. You could pick any of them. Take a step toward it in whatever way makes sense to you, whether it's a very tiny way, a non-monetary way, a larger way. See what you learn from it. And ultimately recognize that purpose doesn't find us when we're waiting to discover what our purpose is. We ultimately live into our purpose, and we find that purpose by just starting with whatever we have.
And thank you for that. Our purpose here is, and your purpose is, to be an incredible inspiration to our viewers. And we have many questions and comments. So now is a chance to get to hear from some of them. And the first one really struck a chord with me. Kathleen mentions that she's moved by the notion that all of you have felt as outsiders at some point. And she asks you to expand on that notion. Is it because of gender or something else? So who would like that first? I think that she mentioned Jacqueline first. So Jacqueline, why don't you start that off?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I wonder if every human being at some point has really felt like an outsider. But again, you know, as Janiece said, without giving our age away, we grew up in a generation where, at least in a kind of a patriarchal family like I grew up in, that was military, Catholic, immigrant. It was very much about the boys. And so it took a while to figure out my own voice. And at one point when I was at Citibank, I was the only woman out of 17 executives. And I started to understand what it meant to be the token. And so I would be very deliberate in trying to think about what the rules were, and also recognized who I was within it. And I think it did make me more aware of other people for whom the rules do not work. And I actually see this being played out in the political economy, that sometimes tiny countries have such a better understanding of the United States than the United States has of how other countries operate. And it's a disadvantage to us. And that's what I mean by the outsider lens. And in a way, the more lenses we have, if we grow up gay, African-American, female, in an all-white community, you certainly know how the world works. And you have to find a way to navigate it. And as you find your own way into your own wholeness, I do think it makes you more aware of other people that might feel left out. And then you can find those ways of getting them in.
Thank you.
But too often we see it as the deficit. There's also the superpower in that same place.
While you all are thinking about your responses, we have been engaged for the last year in an intensive project around homeless and disadvantaged youth. And we found that in talking with our community partners and individuals who've experienced homelessness, young people, we find that sense of outsider because of various identities, whether it's the identity of being without a home or an LGBTQ identity or other identities have made them feel like outsiders in very deep ways. So, Janiece, would you like to respond to this question as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, you know, as Jacqueline was just sharing in terms of even being an outsider, I mean, I think it goes without saying, as a Black woman, there are many experiences I've had when I've been, quote unquote, perceived as an outsider, whether it was my career in high tech. When I left HP, I was one of 2 Black women VPs in a company of over 200,000, right? So more often than not in my career, I have been, quote unquote, the outsider. If you think about the field of philanthropy, I'm still an outsider. There are not many Black women leading sizable philanthropic or nonprofit organizations. So depending on the definition of outsider, I'm still an outsider, right? If you look at the disparities of funding, right, in the nonprofit space, those led by people of color could be perceived as outsiders, and that there's a huge gap in terms of funding and where the resources come from and where they flow. But I've used it as my superpower, right? And I think that is why I'm unapologetic about the work that I'm now doing. And I think that's where my passion comes from, is I do know that there are still lots of gaps that exist, some of which have been imposed by us people, you know, so I sometimes struggle even with the term outsider because I've used that as my superpower.
Well, actually, Janiece, I was thinking that both you and I think it gives skills, but we enter rooms as the quintessential insiders. I just assume that I belong, exactly. But then I have to figure out how to do it. And I do think it gives you different layers. If you let it, you could also just get hardened and angered.
You could right.
By it.
Yeah, people ask
Michele,
me every day, are you happy about the job? And I'm like, I just wanted to share, when this is heavy work. The work that all of us are doing is really heavy work, right? And so it is the case, in terms of being an outsider, right, where we have to somehow find that strength to continue doing this work.
Michele, in your role with the foundation or in academia, the role of being an outsider.
I was going to say, I think it's not just in the current roles that we have. All of us have come up through a variety of paths. And for most of us, at some point, we were the first of whatever it might be, or we were the only of whatever it might be. And I agree with the way Jacqueline was phrasing it, and that is, I think everybody at some point is going to have that outside experience. And hopefully what people can gain from that is, how do you bring people along behind you? They don't have to look like you, or they don't have to be like you, but there are people coming who are also having that outside experience in whatever environment you find yourself. And how is it that you keep to the front of your mind that little twinge that says, how did I find myself when I first walked into this room, and how was I assisted, or if I were not assisted, how might I assist someone else in breaking down that barrier, breaking down that discomfort level, and bringing the person along to try and make sure that we benefit from the tremendous variety of experiences and skills and enthusiasms that people are bringing to whatever environment we find ourselves.
Lily, Janiece mentioned the technology world, the world that you came from as well. Your perspective on the outsider.
So I spent 17 years in technology, and I would say that 9 meetings out of 10, I was the only female at a table of 10 or more people. I found it actually hilarious because the only thing they could talk about before the meeting would start is sports. It's like the only thing that they could actually start to begin their comfort level. And I actually kind of used to giggle inside about that. And I remember so many meetings where Serena and I we got patted on the head by investors. You girls sure have been busy. And I just, it's almost laughable. But I think that just kind of fired me up in a lot of ways to prove them that, we can be very successful. But I also think that, self-esteem for me personally comes from developing my character. And I think at the end of our days, that's all that matters in life. And when we can wrap ourselves around that, we can be powerful in any setting, because that is the true strength of the human. And so I don't ever let success or someone's arrogance or any of that ever get in my way in life, because it's all about how you are nurturing that evolution of yourself and what you want to be known for at the end of your days. So that's my point of view.
Well, self-esteem is a big focal point for us too. I have my favorite question of the hour to ask you, and I will let you know that we have many, many more questions. So we're going to have to do another panel in the future, because people would like to know about your perspective on the pandemic, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, on self-esteem, especially for people who have come through the foster care system. There are many, many issues to continue to discuss. But because this is the Women of Inspiration Roundtable series, I must ask you, who is your woman of inspiration in the world of giving and making the world a better place? And of course, all 4 of you are mine. So I will let you all start. Janiece.
Oh my gosh, I was hoping you wouldn't start with me on this one. Oh my gosh, you said just pick one? That's so hard. Oh my goodness. Well, I'm going to say, because she's one of my mentors, whether she likes it or not. Let me say Jacqueline.
That's a good one. She's a great one, as a matter of fact. Lily, how about you?
Well, Jacqueline, because honestly, I invited her to this panel because I'm so inspired by her. So sorry, Jacqueline. And I happen to be, I'm very inspired by Melinda Gates. I'm very inspired by Michelle Obama. I have many, many women of inspiration. It's a countless list.
Michele.
I think it's interesting. I think we all have many, many different people of inspiration. And when you posed this question originally, I was thinking, where really do you go with this? I went back to my very, very formative years because when I was growing up, our access to a library was through a bookmobile. And one of the series in the bookmobile was a little series of biographies. And in that series of biographies, there was only one woman who had a little biography. This is, in children's literature. And that was Clara Barton. And so since a young age, this is the person who has most inspired me in the form of philanthropy and in civic engagement and giving. Clara Barton, most widely is known as the founder of the American Red Cross, but she was the first patent clerk to ever hold an office. She was on the national speaking tour for the women's suffrage movement. She effectively taught and devised battlefield hospitalization and first aid programs. And she was the first woman to have a national monument erected in her name. So it isn't really current because in the current environment, I think there's so many women who have taken leadership roles. But from perspective of a child and an individual saying, there's someone that I can be like. There's someone who has gone ahead and done the things that she's good at in ways that people recognize, but she didn't do it for that recognition. She did it because those were the kinds of things where she could provide support, she could take advantage of her skills, and provide an inspiration to those coming from behind her.
Well, judging from the comments that we have in the chat and the many more questions, you all are the women of inspiration for our audience members as well. So I hate to bring this discussion to a close, but I'm going to have to. And I want to thank you, Janiece, Lily, Michele, and Jacqueline. It's been an honor to share this hour with you. On behalf of Delivering Good, we hope that our audience will choose to make an impact by supporting our mission. You can do so by texting WOIR 2021 to 243725 or donate online at delivering-good.org. Thank you all for your engagement and support. We have so much more to do together to create a more equitable world. Have a great day and join us next Wednesday, June 16th at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific for a new day, a new horizon. And wonderful to be with you all. Thank you.